Hi there, and welcome once again to the Jo Roberts podcast. Today's podcast, I am going to be talking about boundaries, which is a subject that's very close to my heart, and it's also a subject which is incredibly important to all human beings, so I think it's worth making a podcast about, and I also know that I have quite a few valid insights on the subject. So what are boundaries? Well, boundaries are what make you, you. So this encompasses things such as your likes, your dislikes, your preferences, your emotions, your thoughts, your perspectives and your perceptions, your points of view and, above all else, your physicality. Boundary setting is actually a fairly straightforward and simple issue which our human race at this current point in their evolution insist upon making more difficult than it actually needs to be. So your boundaries are essentially your wants and your wishes, your preferences, etc., what you want to say yes to, what you want to say no to. But at this current point in our evolution as a species, we're making the subject more difficult than it needs to be for a few reasons. The first is social conditioning, which involves demonization of what I call the divine masculine, particularly in women. And when I say divine masculine, it encompasses traits and characteristics such as assertiveness, strength, boundary setting, confidence, all of those kind of things. And traditionally, those have been seen as more masculine traits and have been seen as less than desirable in women. But the crux of these collection of characteristics, both the divine masculine and the divine feminine, is that both men and women are meant to possess both, ideally in a balanced way. So it's not that women are not meant to be assertive, they're meant to have assertiveness, it's just that unfortunately our society has historically reframed assertiveness in women as domineering and or unhealthy. So there are a lot of women who have quite poor boundaries, and there are also a lot of men who have quite poor boundaries as well. Another reason that our society insists upon making this difficult, or does make it difficult, is because our society has not yet evolved to the point of honouring boundaries in the way that they should be honoured. There's still a relative lack of awareness on this issue, and healthy boundary setting is not something which is really at the heart of human society in the way that it could and should be. So what are some signs that your boundaries are unhealthy? Well, that list could potentially be quite long, but for the sake of keeping this podcast at sort of manageable length, I'll just go through some of the highlights. And I think one of the top signs that you have unhealthy boundaries is saying yes when you mean no. Another is, as I've just been saying, lack of assertiveness. Another is reframing assertiveness as either aggression, hostility or confrontation. Another is repetition compulsion as regards seeking out unsafe individuals. Now I'm going to briefly expand upon that. Repetition compulsion is when you keep repeating the same behaviour over and over and over again because it is unconsciously driven. So in this case it would be if you repeatedly have relationships or friendships where people violate your boundaries and treat you poorly because unconsciously you are seeking that out in an attempt to resolve it. So if you keep finding yourself in relationships or friendships over and over again where you are poorly treated, that is a sign, a gigantic red flag that you have poor boundaries. Another sign of unhealthy boundaries is self-abandoning in the face of pressure or even just mere suggestion from others. And again, I want to briefly comment upon this. Your likes, dislikes and preferences and opinions and perspectives, they're all a part of what make you you. And if you have spiritual beliefs, in the bigger picture, these are actually sacred. So if you are abandoning those likes and dislikes and wants and preferences and needs and perspectives because others are pressurising you to do so, or even just casually suggesting that you do so, that is, again, again, a very large red flag that you have unhealthy boundaries, and that boundaries are something that you need to work on in your life. So boundary setting really looks like, at its most basic level, assertiveness and confidence in stating your wants, needs and preferences without any sort of resistance within you. It's done in such a way that you can say no to something or yes to something without experiencing any resistance at all within yourself at doing so. So no guilt, no shame, etc., etc. Which brings me to the next sort of thread of this topic, which is resistance from others to your boundary setting. Now, very commonly, what a lot of people who have poor boundaries say about that is that when they attempt to set boundaries with others, particularly people who don't respect their boundaries, they very often come up against resistance or even potentially abusive behaviour from others when they attempt to set boundaries. So somebody asking you to do something for them and you don't want to do it because it doesn't sort of fit in with your current set of wants and needs and preferences, and you say no to the person and they respond negatively and perhaps even find some sort of way to punish you or treat you poorly as a retaliation. So a lot of people, they kind of give up on the subject when they come up against this in others, and I've seen this in life a great many times, and it's one of the things which tends to hold people back most from setting healthy boundaries and sort of perfecting healthy boundaries within themselves and in their life. And there are a number of ways that you could address this through either sort of your spirituality, religion, or any kind of personal development. I would say that one of the best ways that I've seen in my life of remedying sort of having difficulty with setting boundaries with others or receiving a negative reaction from others when you set boundaries, one of the most useful modalities that I've seen which can help you with this is parts work or internal family systems therapy. It's essentially a form of shadow work which deep dives into sort of your psyche, your personality, and what tends to be the case, if you're experiencing resistance from others when you try to set boundaries, it's more often than not, or potentially always, a sign that you have some form of resistance within you to you setting boundaries. So you may have a part of you that feels that it's shameful to say no to people, or that it makes you a bad person if you say no to somebody. And if you have a part of you that believes that saying no to people and setting healthy boundaries with people makes you quote unquote a bad person, then that will tend to be reflected, or will be reflected, in your external reality, and other people will treat you that way as well. So the solution to that is not to give up on having healthy boundaries. The solution to that is to engage in personal development such as shadow work or parts work until you have worked with the parts of you that have resistance to you setting boundaries and satisfactorily resolved it, because these things in the vast majority of cases they're fixable. You can work with them, you can do something about this. If you have poor boundaries and you're not getting the results you want in life and your relationships are not healthy and respectful, it's not necessarily a dead end, and it doesn't have to be a lost cause. There are things that you can do to help yourself to work with this issue and improve your life and your relationships with others and your boundaries. There are lots of things you can do, and as I said, one of the best things that you can do to address boundaries is you can do parts work, internal family systems therapy, or any form of shadow work really will help you with this issue. But I hope some of this has been useful to whoever listens to this. I do think that this is one of the things which the human race really needs to get a handle on in terms of our evolution as a species, because your boundaries are integral to your experience in this world. You cannot live without them in this world, or you will have a very difficult life if you're trying to live without them. They are what makes you you, and in the bigger picture, especially if you have spiritual beliefs, they are sacred. So the question could and should be asked, What should I do if there is someone in my life who does not respect my boundaries? And the answer to that is dependent upon two factors. Factor one is the extent of the boundary violation, and factor two is how open that person is to changing the boundary violations and modifying their behaviour so that they are no longer causing you any kind of negative experience. So if the person is amenable to changing whatever it is they are doing which is causing you some sort of negative experience, then there's something to work with, and then you should work with that person to improve the situation. If, however, the person falls into the category of someone who is absolutely unwilling to change, and when you confront them about the boundary violation, they either deny it or refuse to change it, then there isn't really much to work with, and you may have to accept that you could be banging your head up against a brick wall, and it may be the more sensible and intelligent decision to walk away from that person. If they have some sort of awareness that it is causing you some sort of negative emotion, the way that they are treating you, and it's a serious enough boundary violation in terms of how it makes you feel, then it could actually be the best decision for you, and probably them as well, to walk away, because if they're unwilling to change their behaviours when they're causing another person some sort of negative experience, then they will probably need to learn, potentially the hard way, that is not acceptable. So there's a few types of people in this world that fall into this kind of category. The most well known about is pathological narcissists, who lack sufficient awareness to understand or accept when their behaviours are causing problems for others, or simply don't have enough awareness to care that that is the case, and usually refuse to acknowledge that they have a problem, refuse to change their behaviours, and therefore it is not really worth trying to create any kind of resolve with someone like that, unless by some miracle you have a high enough level of consciousness that you're able to work with it in some way, and that's not usually the case. If you find yourself in a relationship with someone like that, it's usually because you have triggers which need to be resolved. The other is psychopaths, and if you are unlucky enough to be in a relationship with someone of that ilk, and you're pretty much guaranteed that it will be the case that they will be violating your boundaries in some way, the best course of action in that kind of instance is to walk away as quickly as you can and don't look back, because trying to get someone like that to change is complete folly, and you have absolutely no chance whatsoever of doing so. So I hope some of what I've said in this podcast is useful to somebody somewhere. If you like my content, please consider liking, subscribing, etc. Bye for now, and thanks for listening.